So I want you to picture this for a second.
Yeah.
You are standing deep in the heart of the Papuan rainforest, down in New Guinea.
Oh, man. Okay, I'm picturing it. I imagine it's pretty intense.
Oh, it's incredibly intense. The air around you is just, well, it's thick. It's almost heavy with this crazy humidity.
Right, like you can practically drink the air.
Exactly. And it has this rich, earthy scent of damp moss and decaying leaves, and it's dawn.
Gone in the rainforest is wild. The canopy is basically a solid roof, right?
Yeah, it's this tangled, impenetrable roof of green, so you're only getting these, thin, really sharp shafts of morning sunlight poking through.
And I'm guessing it is definitely not quiet.
Not at all. The ambient noise is deafening. It's a chaotic symphony of buzzing insects, dripping water, and just the distant echoing calls of unseen wildlife.
Sounds isolating.
It is. You feel entirely isolated, like a temporary visitor in this ancient, untouched world. But then, out of the misty shadows, a sudden movement catches your eye.
Okay, I've looked. What is it?
Dropping from the high branches, straight down to this meticulously cleared patch of forest floor, is a creature that, well, it simply shouldn't exist.
A glitch in the matrix.
Literally. It looks like a living optical illusion. It has feathers so intensely black they seem to absorb the very space around them, like a tear in the fabric of reality.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and erupting from this void of black are patches of neon. Iridescent blues and impossible greens that, they look like they're glowing from the inside out.
That is just mind-blowing to visualize.
And it doesn't just sit there. It transforms. It contorts its body, throws its wings up to create a perfect, terrifying black disc, and it begins to perform this jerky alien dance.
It's mesmerizing.
It is entirely bizarre. You, my friend, are looking at a bird of paradise.
That visceral reaction you just described, that feeling that you're looking at something that breaks the rules of reality, is completely universal.
It really is. The family Paradisaeidae, they are just wild.
They've baffled people for centuries. And what makes them such a profound subject for our deep dive today is that they challenge, well, basically our fundamental understanding of everything.
Right, like how evolution and animal behavior intersect.
Exactly. And as we're going to get into later, literally the hard physics of light, all intersecting in one living organism.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. Because for you, listening right now, we are going to tear apart the mystery of the birds of paradise.
It's a big mission.
It is. We want to understand the exact, perfect evolutionary storm that birthed these creatures. And then we are going to geek out, and completely geek out on the mind-bending optical physics hidden inside their wings.
Oh, I cannot wait for the physics part. It's my absolute favorite.
I know it is. You are our resident genius for the optics side of things today, because the reality of how they achieve that glowing neon and a black hole look is, it's actually stranger than fiction.
It really is. And the stack of research we have today to back this up is just massive.
Oh, it's a mountain of data. We've got Vicarian's biogeography papers mapping out the violent tectonic history of the island.
Which is a whole saga in itself.
Truly. Plus, cutting-edge ornithological studies on their incredibly messy mating habits. Sociodemographic data on the ecotourists who travel across the world just to see them.
And of course, that groundbreaking physics paper.
Yes, the one that essentially put these feathers into microscopic particle accelerators to figure out how they swallow light.
It is a phenomenal stack of sources. The sheer breadth of scientific disciplines required to understand just one family of birds is staggering.
You really can't just look at their biology.
No, you have to look at the geology beneath their feet and the physics of the photons hitting their bodies.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because you don't get a bird this weird without an environment that is equally extreme.
The stage for this entire evolutionary play is the island of New Guinea.
And looking at the geological history from our sources, it seems like the formation of this island was basically a multi-million-year slow-motion car crash.
A multi-million-year car crash where the cars are the size of continents.
Right. That's a good way to put it.
If we want to understand why there's such an incredible concentration of diverse, highly specialized birds of paradise right there on the equator, we have to look at the ground beneath them.
Because we usually think of islands as just, pieces of land that broke off a larger continent, like Madagascar.
Or islands that popped up out of the ocean from a volcano like Hawaii. But New Guinea is vastly more complicated. The The source material detailing the biogeography of New Guinea relies heavily on what geologists call the accreted terrain model.
Okay, let me make sure I have this right. A terrain isn't just a generic word for terrain, like a landscape.
No, it's a specific geological term.
Right, so it's a chunk of the Earth's crust that has its own distinct history, separate from the landmass it ends up attached to.
You nailed it. It is a tectonostratigraphic terrain.
Say that 5 times fast.
I will not. But think of the southern part of New Guinea as the anchor. That is the Australian Craton, a massive, stable, ancient piece of continental rock.
Okay, got the anchor.
But the northern part of New Guinea, where you find these spectacular, deeply folded and faulted mountain ranges, is not originally part of that craton at all.
It's like a geological Frankenstein's monster.
Exactly. It's composed of at least 32 distinct terrains.
32. Wow. So it's a patchwork quilt made of islands and ocean floor.
A highly volatile patchwork quilt. These terrains were massive, fault-bounded geological provinces. Some were island arcs, some were fragments of continental crust.
To be formed somewhere else entirely.
Way out in the Pacific Ocean. They had entirely independent histories, separate climates, and separate ecosystems. And over tens of millions of years, driven by the relentless movement of tectonic plates, these 32 terrains were pushed westward and southward.
Just bulldozed across the ocean.
Right. One by one, they crashed into and docked with the Australian Craton.
So you have these massive islands,
Yeah.
each carrying their own isolated ecosystems, their own plants, and their own ancestral birds. And they're literally being smashed together into one giant mountainous landmass.
That's the perfect way to visualize it.
I can see how that would create a biological madhouse. You're forcing all these distinct evolutionary experiments into one room.
Exactly. But it also fundamentally rewrote how scientists think about the distribution of these birds across the island today.
Because for a long time, the traditional view of biogeography relied heavily on the idea of jump dispersal, right?
Yes, jump dispersal, which means a bird originates in point A, and then a few brave or lost individuals fly across an ocean or over a mountain range to colonize point B.
And over time, they adapt to point B and become a new species.
Right. That makes intuitive sense for birds because, well, they can fly.
Yeah, you assume they just flew there.
But the accreted terrain model suggests something completely different for the deep forest birds of New Guinea. It points to a concept called vicariance.
Vicariance, okay, define that for us.
The idea here is that the birds didn't necessarily move across the landscape. The landscape moved beneath the birds.
Oh, man. The Michael Heads paper highlights this perfectly with these massive, inexplicable geographic gaps. The Vogelkopf-Huon disjunctions.
Let's talk about those because the distances involved here are wild.
The Vogelkopf-Huon disjunction is basically a classic head-scratching puzzle in biology.
Yeah.
So you have the Vogelkop Peninsula in the far west of New Guinea
Right.
and the Huon Peninsula in the far east. In both of these regions, you find specific, closely related sister species of birds of paradise, like certain birds in the genera Paradisaea, Astrapia, and Parotia.
But the kicker is what's between them.
Nothing. Or rather, no birds of paradise of those specific lineages.
It's just a huge gap.
There is 1,500 kilometers of continuous, seemingly perfect, mountainous rainforest terrain separating the Vogelkop and the Huon regions.
And those lineages are just absent.
Completely absent from that entire middle stretch. For you listening, 1,500 kilometers is roughly the distance from New York City to Jacksonville, Florida.
That is a massive distance for a bird to skip over.
Right. Imagine if you had a very specific type of cardinal that lived in your backyard in New York, and the exact same type of cardinal lived in a backyard in Florida, but there wasn't a single one of them anywhere in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Virginia, the Carolinas, or Georgia.
It makes no sense.
And it's a bird. If they flew there, you'd think they'd leave a trail of populations along the way.
Yeah, if you try to explain that through jump dispersal, the logic just falls apart.
Why would a highly sedentary forest bird, right? A bird that rarely ever leaves the dense, deep cover of the canopy, suddenly decide to fly 1,500 kilometers past perfectly good, identical rainforest just to settle on the exact opposite side of the island?
It defies behavioral ecology. It just wouldn't happen.
So the vicariance theory steps in. It wasn't the birds migrating. It was the mountains migrating.
The geological data shows that the terrains making up the Vogelkop and the terrains making up the Huon Peninsula may have actually been adjacent to each other.
Wait, really? Next to each other?
Yeah, or part of the exact same island arc system, tens of millions of years ago. They were a single continuous habitat where these ancestral birds lived together.
Oh, wow.
But then Massive strike-slip faults essentially tore that island arc in half. Over millions of years, the tectonic forces slid 1/2 1,500 kilometers down the coast.
That is mind-blowing. The birds just stayed in their trees on their mountains, while the Earth literally carried them across the map, isolating them from their cousins.
The Earth moved them, isolated them, and forced them down entirely unique evolutionary paths.
That tectonic isolation is the bedrock pun intended of their incredible diversity.
Good pun. But isolation alone doesn't give you neon-glowing, dancing birds. You can isolate a pigeon on a mountain for 10 million years, and you probably just end up with a slightly different-looking pigeon.
Right, you need a specific ecological recipe to push evolution into overdrive.
Exactly.
And the sources point to a sort of perfect storm taking place in these isolated, high-altitude tropical forests of New Guinea. The conditions were just remarkably weird.
The ecological conditions are the second crucial ingredient in this evolutionary crucible.
So what was happening in those specific forests?
In these specific mid to high altitude rainforests, two highly unusual things were happening simultaneously that radically altered the pressures of natural selection. First, there was a virtual absence of natural mammalian predators.
I want to pause on that. Why no mammalian predators? It's a tropical rainforest.
Right, you usually expect them.
Yeah, you think of the Amazon with its jaguars or the Congo with leopards. Why is New Guinea empty of them?
It goes back to the geology again. New Guinea is on the eastern side of the Wallace Line.
Ah, the Wallace Line.
Yeah, it's this deep water trench that separates the fauna of Asia from the fauna of Australasia. Placental mammals like cats, monkeys, and wolves evolved in the Americas and Eurasia, but they never made it across that deep ocean trench.
Oh, I see. So they just couldn't physically get there.
Exactly. So New Guinea was largely populated by marsupials and birds. There are no monkeys swinging through the canopy stealing eggs.
And no big cats climbing trees to ambush adult birds.
Right.
So the daily threat level goes from a 10 down to a 2. You aren't constantly looking over your shoulder for a jaguar. What's the second factor?
The second factor is the food supply. The environment is absolutely packed with food, specifically fruiting trees.
Just endless fruit.
The rainforests of New Guinea have an incredibly high density of diverse fig species and other fruits that are available year-round. Now, this fruit is abundant, it is predictable, and it is very easy to find.
Sounds like a pretty sweet deal.
It is, but there is a catch. It is generally low in nutritional density, particularly protein, compared to a diet of catching live insects.
Okay, let me think about how this changes the game. They have infinite, easily accessible food, and no predators trying to eat them.
Pretty much.
That sounds like a literal paradise. I finally get where the name Birds of Paradise comes from.
It fits perfectly.
But, I mean, if survival is that easy, how does it lead to a bird evolving feathers that trap light like a black hole? Shouldn't easy survival just make them lazy and boring?
You'd think so, until you look at how those easy conditions alter the reproductive economics of the species.
Reproductive economics. Okay, break that down.
Think about a typical bird, like a robin. Raising chicks is incredibly hard work. The parents have to constantly hunt for high-protein insects to feed the fast-growing babies.
Right, they're basically flying back and forth all day with worms.
It usually requires both the male and the female working overtime just to keep the chicks alive.
But in New Guinea, the food is everywhere.
Because the fruit is so wildly abundant and easy to locate, a female bird of paradise can easily forage enough food to feed herself and her nestlings entirely on her own.
Wow.
The caloric math works out in her favor. She simply does not need a male to help her provision the nest.
Okay, so I was trying to come up with an analogy for this while I was going through the notes. Tell me if this works.
Let's hear it.
The male birds of paradise are essentially the trust fund kids of the avian world.
Trust fund kids. Oh, I love that.
Think about it. They live in a highly exclusive, gated community where there are 0 predators. All their meals are fully paid for by the environment, just endless buffets of figs.
Yep, the figs are basically catered.
And crucially, they have absolutely 0 parental responsibilities. They don't have to get a job, they don't have to defend a territory, and they don't have to raise the kids.
They do absolutely nothing to help.
They are entirely emancipated, as the literature calls it, from the daily grind of survival. They have an absurd amount of free time and pent-up energy.
Trust fund kids with too much free time is actually a brilliant way to conceptualize the ecological reality of male emancipation.
It just fits so well.
When males are emancipated from parental care, and when baseline survival is basically guaranteed by the environment, The driving force of evolution shifts dramatically.
How so?
It shifts away from natural selection, which is the survival of the fittest, and puts the pedal to the metal on sexual selection.
Because if you aren't fighting for your life, and you aren't spending your days feeding screaming chicks, what do you spend all your time and energy doing?
You spend every waking moment of your adult life trying to impress females. That becomes the sole metric of your evolutionary success.
Right.
If you can't impress a female, your genetic line ends.
Which means the females hold all the cards. This leads us directly into the theater of mating.
The theater of mating, it really is a performance.
Because the females are doing all the heavy lifting, they're building the intricate nests, they're incubating the eggs for weeks, they're flying back and forth feeding the chicks. They get to be incredibly ruthlessly picky about who they mate with.
And female choice is perhaps the most powerful, rapid evolutionary engine in the natural world. It creates a massive feedback loop.
But the social structure that evolves to accommodate this relentless female choice is what's truly fascinating.
Right, because the fruit, while abundant, is spread out patchily through the vast rainforest. The birds don't maintain small, easily defendable territories, like a songbird in your garden.
So they don't just hang out in one bush.
Instead, many polygynous birds of paradise, meaning the males attempt to mate with as many females as possible, organize themselves into what researchers call exploded licks.
An exploded leak. That sounds like a chaotic mess.
It's a very specific term.
I know a regular leak is like what sage grouse do, right?
Yeah.
Where all the males gather in one tight little clearing and strut around together, and the females come and watch the whole group at once.
Exactly.
How is an exploded leak different?
Well, in a classic leak, you have direct side-by-side visual comparison. Dozens of males might be within a few feet of each other.
Yep.
But in the incredibly dense, visually restrictive rainforest canopy of New Guinea, long sight lines simply don't exist. You can't see 50 feet in front of you, let alone watch 30 birds dance at once.
Oh, right. There's just too much jungle in the way.
So the birds of paradise use an exploded leak. The displaying males are spread out fairly evenly over a huge swath of the landscape. They might be 100 meters or even 500 meters apart from one another.
So they can't see each other at all.
They are entirely out of visual contact, but, and this is key, they are in constant, extremely loud vocal contact.
It's like shouting at each other.
The rainforest canopy is just echoing with their calls. They are constantly shouting at each other across the valleys, establishing their presence and their vigor.
They are staking out acoustic territory, even if they aren't staking out physical feeding territory.
Exactly.
And then they set up these display courts, right?
Yes. Diamond's 1986 observations provide some incredible detail on this. Depending on the species, a male will establish a specific terrestrial display court.
Like on the ground.
Yep. Males of the genus Parotia, for example, will find a patch of the forest floor and become absolute neat freaks.
Neat freaks. That's funny.
They will meticulously clean it. They will use their beaks to toss away every fallen leaf, snap off every intruding twig, and pluck away any moss or debris until they have a perfectly smooth, unobstructed patch of dirt.
It's like they're sweeping the stage before the curtain goes up.
It is exactly that. And the competition between males is so fierce that Diamond noted they will actively sabotage each other.
No way.
They will steal decorations from rival males like shed snakeskins, interesting leaves, or even mammal scats to adorn the edges of their own courts.
Wait, mammal scat? Gross.
Hey, whatever impresses the ladies. Interestingly, unlike bowerbirds, which build massive structures to impress females, birds of paradise don't incorporate these stolen items into the physical performance. They just seem to want a clean stage with some edgy perimeter decor.
So the males have their clean little dirt stages. They are screaming into the void, and the females are just wandering through.
The females will travel through this massive exploded leak, visiting multiple different courts. They are window shopping.
Window shopping for mates.
They will sit on a branch above the court and watch a male perform his incredibly complex, physically demanding dance. Then she might just fly away and go check out the guy 300 meters down the hill.
Oh, that's gold.
She samples the displays of multiple males before making a final decision.
The pressure on the males must be unfathomable. If you mess up one step of the dance, or if a feather is out of place, she just leaves.
It's a tough crowd.
And this intense window shopping is what drives the extreme sexual dimorphism we see, right? The males and females of the same species end up looking like completely different animals.
Oh, absolutely.
The males become these elaborate, glowing showpieces, while the females stay camouflaged. usually browns and mottled greens, so they can hide on the nest safely.
The selective pressure is so intense that it doesn't just change their feather colors. It physically changes the skeletal and muscular shape of the males over millions of years.
Really, they're actual skeletons.
Yeah. What's fascinating here is that to understand just how deep this physical modification goes, we should look at the 2024 morphometric study on riflebirds, the genus Ptiloris.
Oh yes, the data analysis by Ligon and colleagues that Sikora referenced. They wanted to see if the bizarre dances of the riflebirds actually forced their wings to change shape.
Because the riflebird dance is wild.
It really is. When a male riflebird displays, he throws both of his wings straight up and over his head to form this nearly perfect circular black funnel.
Like a giant cone.
Yeah, and he tucks his head completely behind his wings, hiding his face, and reveals only this blindingly bright, iridescent throat patch. It looks like a radar dish made of feathers.
It is a highly mechanical, physically exhausting posture. He has to hold that rigid funnel shape while rapidly swaying his body.
Which takes serious core strength for a bird.
The researchers hypothesized that if females are constantly, generation after generation, choosing males who can make the biggest, most perfectly symmetrical circle with their wings, then over evolutionary time, male riflebirds should evolve significantly larger wings relative to their body size compared to other birds of paradise that don't do that specific dance.
That makes logical sense.
Yeah.
To figure this out, the researchers went deep into the math. They didn't just go out with a tape measure.
No, it was much more rigorous.
They used museum specimens from 39 different species of birds of paradise. And they ran these phylogenetic log-log regression models.
Let's translate that for a second.
Please do.
They were looking at the residuals of wing length against tarsus length.
The tarsus is basically the lower leg bone, right? Which is a standard stand-in for the bird's overall body size.
That's a great translation. Yes, the tarsus length gives you the baseline size of the bird chassis, so to speak.
The chassis, I like that.
By looking at the residuals in a log-log regression, they are mathematically asking, given how big this bird's body is, are its wings disproportionately larger or smaller than we would expect?
Okay, got it. And the phylogenetic part. The study mentions they used a parameter called Pagel's lambda to account for relatedness.
This is a crucial step in evolutionary biology. Imagine you are studying a family tree of humans to see if playing basketball makes you taller.
Okay.
If you find two tall brothers who both play basketball, you can't just assume the basketball made them tall.
Right, they might just have tall parents.
They share genetics. Pagel's lambda is a mathematical tool that essentially erases that brother effect. It accounts for how closely related different species of birds are on the evolutionary tree.
Oh, that's clever.
It ensures that if two species both have big wings, the math checks whether they evolved those big wings independently because of their dance, or if they just inherited them from a shared ancestor who happened to have big wings.
That is fascinating. It isolates the actual evolutionary pressure of the dance from just generic inheritance.
Exactly.
So when they ran all these numbers, scrubbing out the ancestry, what did the data actually show about the riflebirds? Did the dance make their wings bigger?
The initial raw data, the ordinary least squares models, suggested a massive difference. It looked like the riflebird genus exhibited significantly more sexual dimorphism in relative wing length than other socially monogamous clades of birds of paradise.
So the male's wings looked huge compared to the females.
Right. But when they applied Pagel's lambda and accounted for the phylogenetic relatedness, that massive effect actually lost its broad statistical significance across the whole family.
Wait, really? So the math says the wings aren't actually that much bigger? I feel like my eyes are lying to me when I watch the videos.
It's not that your eyes are lying, it's that the evolutionary strategy is incredibly nuanced. The male riflebirds as a whole genus do not necessarily have drastically larger wings relative to their body size when compared to all other specific lineages of birds of paradise.
Okay, so it's not universal across the board.
However, the study found that within certain species, like the magnificent riflebird and the growling riflebird, they exhibit some of the most extreme sexual dimorphism in relative wing length measured.
So in specific cases, it is extreme.
The female's wings are staying relatively short and efficient for normal forest life, while the male's wings are maximizing the aerodynamic and mechanical potential strictly for that display.
So it's not just about blindly evolving a giant wing. It's about evolving the exact biomechanical tool required to perform that specific, rigorous courtship dance perfectly time and time again.
Exactly. The female isn't just selecting for size, she's selecting for architectural perfection.
It is an arms race of aesthetic perfection.
But there is a really messy side to all this frantic displaying and window shopping.
Oh, yeah, the messy side.
When you have an entire forest full of hyper-competitive, emancipated males who are loaded with energy and will dance for literally anything that moves, mistakes are bound to happen.
That is so true. The sources highlighted two major unintended consequences of this mating system. And the first one is hybridization.
Interspecific and even intergeneric hybridization.
Which is wild to think about.
In most parts of the animal kingdom, breeding outside of your species is incredibly rare. There are usually huge behavioral, physical, or genetic barriers.
Right. And even if it happens, it usually results in unviable or sterile offspring, like a mule.
Exactly. But among birds of paradise, it happens with astonishing frequency. According to the research by Sikora and colleagues, no other family of birds in the entire world has such a high number of documented interspecific hybrids, with one notable exception.
The ducks, the Anatidae family.
Always the ducks.
Yeah.
But when you look at the behavioral ecology of ducks, the parallel makes perfect sense. Just like birds of paradise, many species of ducks are highly polygynous.
Right.
The males are completely emancipated from nest building, incubating, and rearing the ducklings.
Ah, I see the connection now. If the female is doing 100% of the work raising the kids alone, making a quote-unquote mistake in mate choice doesn't actually impact her ability to perform her maternal duties.
Precisely.
Because if a female songbird chooses a mate of the wrong species, and he doesn't know how to help her feed the chicks, the whole nest dies. The evolutionary penalty is immediate and brutal.
But if a female bird of paradise succumbs to the charms of a different species, she just flies off, builds her nest, and raises the hybrid chick on the abundant fruit, just as she would a normal chick.
So there's very little immediate ecological penalty for her mistake.
Meanwhile, the males are so desperate to pass on their genes, and they are so flooded with hormones during the breeding season, that they will attempt to display to and copulate with females of different species, or even entirely different genera.
Which results in these bizarre Frankenstein birds showing up in the jungle.
It really does.
The source mentions the wonderful bird of paradise, which sounds like a legit species, Paradisaea mirabilis. But scientists eventually realized it wasn't a unique species at all.
No, it was a hybrid.
It was a hybrid between a lesser bird of paradise and a 12-wired bird of paradise. Those are two totally different genera.
It's crazy.
That would be like a coyote successfully breeding with a fox.
It highlights just how powerful the male's urge to display is, and how confusing the sheer variety of dances and plumages must be in the dense forest.
For sure.
And because these successful alpha males are so aggressive in their mating attempts, interacting with so many females of their own species and occasionally other species, it leads to this second unintended consequence.
Let me guess. They become massive biological hazards.
They act as parasite superspreaders.
I was hoping we'd get to the feather mites. This part of the research was equally fascinating and deeply gross.
The Sikora paper details the distribution of a specific family of feather mites called syringophilid mites. The species they focused on is Picobia franci.
Okay.
Now, the thing you need to know about mites is that they are usually highly host-specific. Over millions of years, a mite evolves to live on the specific feather structure and skin chemistry of one single species of bird.
So they don't like to jump ship.
They rarely do. But the researchers found Picobia franci living on manucodes, which are a very ancient basal lineage of birds of paradise, meaning they branched off the family tree very early on.
Okay, so they're on the old branches.
But they also found the exact same species of mite living on riflebirds, which are a much more modern, derived lineage that branched off millions of years later.
So how does one highly specialized species of mite manage to jump between two types of birds that haven't shared a common ancestor in millions of years and don't even look or act alike?
The answer is the alpha males.
Of course it is.
During their foraging downtime, when they aren't displaying, birds of paradise frequently join mixed species foraging flocks to find fruit trees. You have all these different species crammed into one canopy.
Right.
And because the highly successful polygynous males secure the vast majority of copulations, they are in frequent, intimate physical contact with dozens of females.
A highly successful male bird of paradise is basically the ultimate mass transit system for parasites.
Pretty much.
He hangs out in a crowded mixed species flock, picks up a mite from a manicode, flies back to his display court, mates with 20 different female rifle birds, and transmits the mite to every single one of them.
It is the dark side of male emancipation. The very behavior that makes them evolutionary marvels also turns them into perfect vectors for disease and parasites.
Okay, that is beautifully logical, if slightly horrifying. But I want to push back a little here, because we haven't answered the core mystery.
Okay, lay it on me.
We've established that the females are incredibly picky. We've established that this pickiness drives the males to evolve extreme wing shapes, to clear terrestrial dirt stages, and to dance so frantically that they accidentally hybridize and spread mites. I get all of that.
Right.
But how does any of this behavioral ecology explain why they look like literal optical illusions?
Here we go.
I mean, a male throwing his wings up in a circle is impressive biomechanics.
Huh.
But evolving feathers that trap light like a physical black hole, how does biology, using the exact same keratin that makes up my fingernails, create a structure that defies normal optics?
That is the perfect question to bridge the gap, because you're right, behavioral observation only gets us so far. To understand the optical illusion, we have to transition from ecology into hard optical physics. We have to look at the bird not as an animal, but as a light-manipulating material.
Oh, this is going to be good.
And this is where the 2018 Nature Communications paper by Dakota McCoy and her team completely revolutionized our understanding of these feathers.
I have been waiting for this. Let's geek out on the physics. Tell me what makes super black different from just regular black. Because my dog is black, but he doesn't look like a tear in the fabric of the universe.
That's a great point. To appreciate the super black, we first need a baseline. When you look at a normal black bird, say a crow or a raven, or even the normal black feathers on the back of a bird of paradise, the color is produced by a pigment called melanin.
Right, melanin.
Melanin is great at absorbing light, but at the microscopic level, the surface of a normal feather is relatively smooth and flat. Because it's smooth, it still has a directional reflectance of about 3.2% to 4.7%.
Meaning, when sunlight hits the crow, roughly 3 to 5% of that light bounces off the smooth surface of the feather and hits your eye.
Correct. And that bounced light is what creates specular highlights.
Specular highlights, that's the term used in 3D rendering and photography, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's the shiny white glare you see on the surface of an object, like the white glint on a freshly polished apple, or the reflection on a car bumper.
Exactly. When you look at a crow in the sun, it looks glossy. You see the white glare of the sun reflecting off the black feathers.
Okay, so that's normal black.
But the researchers in the 2018 study wanted to measure the black plumage specifically from the display capes, the feathers used during the dance of 5 specific birds of paradise, including Lafarina superba, the superb bird of paradise, and Parotia wanesi.
How do you even measure the blackness of a feather? Like mathematically?
They use a device called a spectrophotometer with a highly calibrated directional light source. They shine a known quantity of light at the feather from specific angles and measure exactly how many photons bounce back.
And what were the numbers?
The numbers they got from the display feathers were staggering. These super black feathers had a directional reflectance of just 0.05% to 0.31%.
Wait, 0.05%. So it's not reflecting 3% of the light. It is reflecting less than 1/10%.
Yes. They are absorbing, or more accurately, trapping up to 99.95% of directly incident light.
That is insane.
And this isn't just in one specific color wavelength. This absorption is across the entire visible spectrum. If you look at the graph of their reflectance, the curve isn't sloping upward anywhere. It is dead flat. They are absorbing almost everything.
Can't even picture that.
The directional reflectance is 1 to 2 orders of magnitude lower than normal black feathers. These natural feathers, grown by a bird in a jungle, are approaching the light-trapping capabilities of the most advanced, artificially engineered, ultra-absorbent materials on Earth. Like the super black carbon nanotube arrays that NASA uses to line the inside of space telescopes so stray light doesn't ruin the image.
Okay, but again, NASA uses engineered carbon nanotubes in a sterile lab. This is a bird. Its feathers are made of keratin. How is keratin trapping 99.95% of light?
It all comes down to the microscopic architecture of a light trap. To figure this out, the researchers couldn't just use a normal microscope. They used scanning electron microscopy, or SEM, and high-resolution synchrotron radiation X-ray microtomography.
Nano-CT scans. They literally put the feathers in a particle accelerator.
They did. They did it to get three-dimensional nanoscale models of the feathers. They focused on the barbules.
Barbules, let's describe those.
If you picture a feather, you have the central stiff shaft. Coming off that shaft are the branches, called barbs. And coming off those barbs are even tinier branches called barbules.
Okay, shaft, barbs, barbules. Got it.
In a normal feather, these barbules are flat, pennaceous structures. They lie horizontally, perfectly in the plane of the feather, and they overlap smoothly like shingles on a roof to create a sleek, aerodynamic surface.
So light hits those flat microscopic shingles and bounces off, creating the glossy glare.
Right. But when they looked at the super black feathers under the electron microscope, the nanoanatomy was completely modified. It didn't look like a feather at all.
What did it look like?
Instead of being flat, the barbules looked like tiny, jagged, dried oak leaves or microscopic coral reefs. They had these microscale spikes and ridges along the margins.
Oh, weird.
And crucially, they did not lie flat. They curved upward out of the plane of the feather, forming a densely packed array that was tilted at roughly a 30-degree angle toward the distal tip or the far end of the feather.
So instead of a smooth floor of overlapping shingles, the surface of the feather is like a dense vertical forest of tilted, spiky trees.
Yes, and that spiky forest creates deep micro-cavities. We're talking about microscopic chasms between the barbules that are 200 to 400 microns deep, but only 5 to 30 microns wide.
That's incredibly deep and narrow.
This physical structure is what causes a phenomenon called structural absorption. It means the blackness isn't coming from the pigment alone, it's coming from the shape.
How does the shape trap light? Walk me through what happens to a photon when it hits this feather.
When a photon of light enters one of these tilted microcavities, it doesn't just hit a flat surface of melanin and reflect back to your eye. It hits the spiky, jagged edge of one of those oak leaf barbules.
Okay.
A tiny fraction of that light reflects off the edge, but because it is deep inside a tilted cavity, it doesn't reflect back out. It reflects deeper into the feather, hitting the wall of the adjacent barbule,
And
then it reflects again, going even deeper. Every single time the light scatters and hits a keratin surface, a proportion of its energy is absorbed by the melanin inside.
Oh, I see. It's like a microscopic pinball machine. The photon is the pinball. It enters the cavity, but instead of bouncing out, it gets trapped between the bumpers. And every time it hits a bumper, the ball loses energy and gets a little bit smaller until it just eventually disappears completely.
That is a brilliant analogy, yes. The researchers actually proved this multiple scattering effect using virtual ray tracing simulations.
How do they do that?
They took the 3D to nano CT scans they made of the feathers, loaded them into an advanced optical engineering software called FRED, and shot 1 million simulated light rays at the virtual feather.
Like computing the lighting in a high-end video game.
Exactly the same principle.
Yeah.
The software tracked the path of every single virtual photon. They found that in normal black feathers, most light rays scattered only once before leaving the feather.
Which gives you the 3% reflection.
But in the super black feathers, between 33% and 95% of the light rays scattered at least twice, bouncing off multiple surfaces inside the cavities.
That's amazing.
This forced multiple scattering is what traps the light. The physical architectural structure of the feather forces the light to bounce around inside a maze until its energy is entirely depleted.
Okay, this brings me to my absolute favorite part of the entire study, the gold sputter coating experiment.
Oh, this is the best part.
Because, of course, scientists figure out this incredibly complex light maze, and their first instinct is to paint it in solid gold, just to see what happens.
It sounds absurd, but it's standard procedure for electron microscopy. To view non-conductive biological samples like feathers under a scanning electron microscope, you have to coat them in a highly conductive material so the electrons don't just build up and burn the sample.
Right.
They usually use a microscopic layer of gold. Now, gold is obviously highly reflective. When they sputter-coated the normal black feathers with gold, exactly what you would expect happened. The feathers looked incredibly shiny and metallic. They reflected the light perfectly.
Because they were essentially flat surfaces painted gold. But what happened when they coated the super black feathers in gold?
They still look black.
That is the most insane detail of this whole topic. They took a feather, covered it entirely in solid, highly reflective gold, and it still looked like a black hole.
Because the structural absorption is just that powerful. Even though the surface material was now made of highly reflective gold instead of melanin-packed keratin, the physical shape of the microcavities, the deep tilted oak leaf structures, kept trapping the light.
Wow.
The photons entered the cavities, bounced off the gold walls multiple times, and were still lost deep inside the structure. The physical architecture literally overrode the reflective properties of the gold coating.
So we have an evolutionary process that took a keratin fingernail and turned it into a microscopic array of light-trapping pinball machines.
It's astounding.
But here's where we have to connect the physics back to the biology. Evolution is blind. It doesn't have an end goal. It just responds to pressures.
Right.
Evolving a microscale light-trapping array requires an astonishing amount of genetic trial and error and energy over millions of years. Why go through all that trouble? Why does a bird need to be a black hole?
To answer that, we have to look at who the bird is trying to impress, and from what exact physical angle. The physics paper reveals a critical detail about the super black plumage. It has an extreme directional bias.
Directional bias. Meaning what?
Because all those microscopic oak leaf barbules are tilted at a 30-degree angle, the feather is not perfectly black from every single direction. If you look at it from the side or from below, light can sometimes escape.
So it's an illusion that only works from a specific vantage point.
The optical simulations showed that the super black feathers always reflected the majority of their remaining energy toward the proximal direction, back towards the base of the feather. The feather only achieves that absolute 99.95% light-trapping black hole effect when it is viewed from one specific angle.
Which they call the distal viewing quadrant.
Exactly, the distal viewing quadrant.
Meaning you have to be looking straight down the barrel of the feather, straight into the openings of those tilted microcavities.
Precisely. And in the wild, who is sitting exactly at that angle?
The female. I watched the videos of the superb bird of paradise displaying. The female is always perched on a branch slightly above him, looking down.
Yeah.
And he is constantly shifting his body, almost like a satellite dish, adjusting his angle to make sure her eyes are perfectly aligned with his feathers. He is literally aiming his microcavities at her retinas.
He is. He performs his complex display, whether he's hanging upside down from a canopy branch or standing on a cleared terrestrial dirt court, to ensure that the female is positioned exactly within that distal viewing quadrant.
Okay, but why does she care if he's black? Being a black hole is a neat physics trick, but how is that sexy to a bird?
Because he isn't just black. And this is the crux of the illusion. Look closely at any photograph of Lophrina superba or Parodisaea wanisi.
Okay.
The super black plumage is never isolated. It is never the only feature. It is always located immediately adjacent to intensely bright, structurally colored feathers, brilliant, highly reflective iridescent blues, greens, and yellows.
Right, the neon colors.
The super black cape always perfectly surrounds a glowing neon blue breast shield or bright eye spots. The black hole is acting as a frame, and the purpose of the frame is to completely hack the female's vertebrate brain.
Okay, this is the sensory illusion part. Walk me through the neurobiology here. How does a black frame hack a brain?
It has to do with how all vertebrate brains, including human brains and bird brains, process visual information. The world around us doesn't have consistent lighting.
Sure, it changes all the time.
The spectrum of sunlight changes radically throughout the day. The light filtering through the green forest canopy is vastly different from the light out in an open field. To understand the true color of an object, our brains have to constantly estimate the ambient light and mathematically subtract it out of our vision.
So our brain is doing math behind the scenes.
Constantly. This subconscious process is called von Kreis correction.
So our brain is constantly running a white balance algorithm, like a camera, to make sure a red apple still looks red, whether we are in sunlight or under a fluorescent bulb.
Exactly. But to run that algorithm, our brains need visual cues from the environment. The most important cue we use to estimate ambient light is specular highlights, those shiny white reflections we talked about earlier, the glare on the surface of objects.
Because the white glare is just the pure reflection of the light source. It tells your brain exactly what color the light hitting the object actually is, which gives you the baseline for the equation.
You've got it. The specular highlight is the baseline. Now imagine you are a female bird of paradise. You are sitting on a branch in the dappled light of the rainforest. The male throws up his super black cape, perfectly framing his bright blue iridescent breast shield.
Okay, I'm visualizing it.
By placing a 99.95% light-absorbing black hole directly next to a bright color, the male bird completely removes all specular highlights from his body. There is no white glare anywhere on him. There are no visual cues for ambient light.
He deletes the baseline.
He completely crashes her von Kree's color correction software. Because her brain can no longer properly estimate the ambient light, the math of her visual processing breaks down.
Wow.
The denominator in her visual correction equation essentially drops to zero. When this happens, the adjacent structural colors, the blues and greens on his breast shield, appear to the brain to be emitting more light than is physically possible given the ambient conditions.
They appear to be self-luminous.
They look like they're glowing, like intensely bright neon signs floating in the absolute dark. The super black isn't just a dark color. It's a physiological mechanism designed to artificially inflate the perceived brilliance of the sexual ornament.
So the male isn't just wearing a nice, colorful suit. He hasn't just evolved pretty feathers. He has evolved over millions of years to physically manipulate the hardwired sensory biases of the female's mind. He is controlling how her visual cortex processes reality.
It is a breathtaking example of sensory exploitation, and what's even more profound is that it works on us, too.
Really?
Yeah.
Our brains fall for it.
Because we share that fundamental vertebrate brain architecture, if you look at a high-quality video or photograph of a superb bird of paradise displaying, your human brain falls for the exact same optical illusion. You perceive the blue as glowing neon because your own von Kree's correction is being manipulated just as effectively as the female birds.
That is profoundly unsettling and incredibly cool. We are looking at a creature that has mastered optics and neurobiology entirely through the blind process of sexual selection.
It really makes you appreciate the power of evolution.
So we've covered the geology, the lex, the mites, the physics, and the brain hacking. But what does this all mean for us today? Because as amazing as this is in an evolutionary vacuum, these birds aren't just fossils or equations. They exist right now in forests that are rapidly changing.
Which brings us to a very modern reality. We've spent this time dissecting the science, but the awe that these birds inspire has tangible, real-world consequences.
Yeah, people really care about these birds.
This is where the 2024 sociological study by Insan Kurnia and his team from IPB University comes in. They provide a fascinating look into the modern human connection to these evolutionary marvels, specifically looking at ecotourism in Indonesia.
They conducted a massive online survey, right? Getting data from over 1,200 Indonesian birdwatchers across 33 provinces.
That's a huge sample size.
It is. They wanted to understand the demographics of these birdwatchers and what drives their travel preferences. And the data is really telling. It turns out birdwatchers don't just want to look at pigeons in their local park.
Not at all. The researchers used chi-square tests and generalized linear models to analyze the survey data and see what variables influence travel choices.
And what did they find?
They found that distance is a major factor, but not in the way you might assume. People didn't want convenience. A staggering 91.5% of these birdwatchers preferred locations far from where they live.
They want the challenge.
Almost 40% of the respondents explicitly stated a preference for destinations completely outside their home biogeographic region.
They actively want to cross the Wallace line. They want to leave the familiar Asian fauna and see what weird evolutionary experiments are happening on the other tectonic plates.
The statistical modeling showed a very clear demographic trend. The people most willing to travel these huge distances were generally young respondents who live in urban areas, have higher incomes, are active members of conservation organizations, and rate themselves as having high birdwatching skills.
Hardcore birders.
Exactly. And when asked what region in the entire archipelago they most wanted to visit outside their own, the Papua region was the absolute, undisputed #1 destination. And their ultimate target species, Paradisaeidae, the birds of paradise.
Papua is the holy grail. It's the ultimate prize for a birdwatcher. If you know about the physics and the biology, you have to see it in person.
You really do.
And the Kurnia study makes the vital point that this intense fascination isn't just a niche hobby. It fuels a vital ecotourism economy. People are willing to travel huge distances, spend substantial money on flights and accommodations, and hire local guides just for the chance to sit in a humid jungle and watch a neon-glowing bird do a weird dance in a patch of cleared dirt.
That economic value is critical. Ecotourism brings real, tangible economic value to keeping these remote forests standing. It creates a paradigm where the birds and the pristine habitat they require are worth significantly more alive and intact than they are dead or logged.
Which is so important right now.
And that economic incentive is desperately needed because the reality check provided by the conservation literature is sobering.
The conservation data shows that these species are highly vulnerable. The very things that make them so unique, their extreme specialization, their reliance on specific fruit, their isolation on tectonic mountain ranges, also make them incredibly fragile when faced with rapid change.
Very fragile.
The sources mentioned a paper by Lalo, emphasizing the need for tree buffer zones. What exactly does that mean in the context of their leks?
Because male birds of paradise use very specific terrestrial courts or specific high canopy branches for their exploded leks, they are incredibly sensitive to any microhabitat disruption.
They need their stages to be perfect.
They have meticulously chosen their stages for optimal acoustics and lighting. If a logging company comes in, or even if a poorly managed intrusive ecotourism operation alters the canopy structure, changes the way the light filters down, or disturbs the specific display trees, the males will simply abandon the site.
Wow, they just leave.
They cannot perform their optical illusions if the lighting is wrong. They require undisturbed tree buffer zones to maintain their intricate mating theater.
That makes total sense.
The 1,500-kilometer geographic gaps created by tectonic plates isolated them safely for millions of years. But today, a new logging road can isolate a population overnight, and they simply cannot adapt their deeply ingrained behaviors fast enough to survive it.
And it's not just habitat loss from logging or agriculture. We also have to talk about the historical and ongoing direct threats to the birds themselves. The review document on conservation specifically points out that the very feathers we've been geeking out over, the super black light traps, the iridescent neon blues, are a massive liability for the birds.
Unfortunately, yes. The same visual spectacle that attracts birdwatchers has historically attracted hunters. There is a long, devastating history of hunting these birds strictly for their spectacular plumage.
It's so sad.
In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, millions of birds of paradise skins were exported to Europe to fuel the millinery trade, to adorn the lavish hats of high society women. The demand was insatiable.
It's sickening to think that these structures, which took millions of years of evolution to perfect just to impress a female in the jungle, were reduced to hat decorations.
Today, international trade is heavily restricted by treaties like CITES, but the threat hasn't vanished. There is still ongoing illegal hunting for use in traditional clothing, cultural customs, and the black market.
It's a constant pressure.
When you combine the pressure of overhunting with the rapid, widespread deforestation of tropical rainforests for large-scale agriculture, the populations of highly endemic species, like Paradisaea, apoda, and Astrapia stephaniae, are under severe immediate threat.
It's agonizing to think about. Losing these birds wouldn't just be losing a pretty animal in the jungle. Think about the sheer depth of what we've covered today. If they go extinct, we aren't just losing a bird.
We lose so much more.
We're losing millions of years of unparalleled biological optical engineering. We'd be losing the living proof of terrain tectonics. We'd be losing the ultimate perfected endpoint of male emancipation and the power of female choice. We'd be losing a creature that figured out how to mathematically hack the visual processing center of the vertebrate brain using nothing but modified keratin.
It would be a profound loss of biodiversity, yes, but also a devastating loss of biological genius. As the Biodiversity Review pointed out, Papua is one of the world's most critical biodiversity hotspots.
It really is.
Conserving these birds requires synthesizing everything we've talked about today. It requires deep biological knowledge understanding their specific microhabitat needs, their buffer zones, and their fragile breeding dynamics combined with sociocultural solutions.
We have to balance it all.
We need sustainable ecotourism models that genuinely benefit local communities, ensuring that protecting the forest is the most economically viable choice for the people who live there.
Okay, let's take a breath and recap this incredible journey. We started deep in the earth, with 32 geological terrains slowly crashing into the Australian Craton, tearing island arcs apart and isolating populations of birds on mountainous life rafts for millions of years.
The slow-motion car crash.
Right, and then we moved into the canopy, where a perfect ecological storm of zero mammalian predators and infinite easy fruit turned male birds into emancipated trust fund kids with nothing to do but dance. We saw how relentless, picky females drove those males to evolve absurd wings, clear, elaborate dirt stages, and dance so frantically they accidentally hybridized with other genera and spread feather mites across the evolutionary tree.
And then we zoomed into the nanoscale, putting feathers into particle accelerators to find that these birds had evolved fields of microscopic, tilted oak leaf-shaped cavities, a biological black hole that traps 99.95% of light, specifically designed for one viewing angle, all to delete the specular highlights from the environment and crash the female's von Kreis correction, tricking her brain into seeing a self-luminous neon glow.
It is a sensory hack of the highest possible order. Which brings us to our final thought. The male bird of paradise evolved this super black plumage purely to manipulate the hardwired sensory biases in the female's brain. He makes her perceive a glowing neon reality that is mathematically and optically an illusion.
And so I want to leave you, the listener, with this thought. How much of what you find beautiful, compelling, or even real in your own daily human life is just a sensory hack?
Oh, that's a good question.
Think about the hypersaturated design of your smartphone screen, engineered to trigger dopamine, or the meticulously calculated high-contrast lighting in a luxury retail store, or the chemically engineered crunch and flavor release of a snack food.
We're surrounded by it.
How often is your own brain's hardwiring being manipulated? How often are your own sensory baselines being bypassed and your von Kreis corrections being crashed without you even realizing it?
Are we really any different than the female bird sitting in the forest, staring wide-eyed at a perfectly engineered illusion? The next time you find yourself mesmerized by something shiny, neon, or perfectly black, take a step back and ask yourself, who built the light trap? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope you leave with your brain a little more stretched and your eyes a little more open. Keep questioning the world around you, even the parts that seem to disappear into the misty shadows.